Delish.
Yay! So welcome back to day one of the Before I Die New Mexico Festival. I'm Gail Rubin, the doyen of death and your festival coordinator. I want to give a shout out for all of our festival supporters that make this festival possible, which includes A Good Goodbye, which is my company, the Bernalillo County Indigent Program, Better Place Forests, Bosque Trails Hospice, which will be hosting tomorrow's events, Conscious Crossroads End of Life Services. That's our friend Death Doula Danielle. Snoop Heskey, Death Doula Professionals, that's Brooke Nutting. End of Life Options New Mexico, which we have a bunch of those folks here, and they're checking you in at registration. French Funerals and Cremations, also a very long-time supporter of my work. Keeper Memorials, thank you, Keeper, for providing the online Zoom access to our friends out there in online land. And of course, Passages International. And so happy to have our panel discussion for this afternoon. Today is eco-friendly funerals, and put together this panel I titled Desert, Forest, Sea, etc. Eco-friendly disposition options. We have on our esteemed panel here, Jess Wakefield with Better Place Forests, Darren Crouch with Passages International, and Brian Beard with La Puerta Natural Burial Ground here in New Mexico, right near Belen. Now, I do have a person in the audience who gave me this little hearing aid booster thing, so we're going to be passing that back and forth. And just so you know, that's
what we're doing.
It's not a magic little box thing. But. So why don't each of you talk a little bit about your approach to eco-friendly funerals and what you would want the general public to know?
I get to start.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm with Better Place Forests, and we predominantly only deal with cremated remains, compost, and alkaline hydrolysis remains. But because I'm a licensed funeral director and embalmer who has a long history behind that, I'm a huge advocate for speaking up for yourself, and any funeral home can perform a green experience for you. You just have to know what to ask for and to really kind of get in there and dictate what you're looking for. Even the corporate funeral homes can make that happen. So it's a matter of learning what your options are as a consumer and being able to kind of decide and dictate to your funeral director what you're looking for. I very much have fought for my client families over the years of, like, if they're wanting to bring the loved one home to the house, making it happen, finding ways to kind of make those processes happen. I'm a big believer that every funeral home has the ability to perform a green experience for a family. So that being said, if you have questions or you have funeral homes that are not wanting to work with you, reach out to me. I'm more than happy to help them, coach them through that process, because it is very, very doable.
Well done. I think that's why today is so important, and what Gail does is so important, because if you don't talk about it before the inevitable happens, you're less likely to get what you want. So you think about how you intentionally live your life, and then when you pass away, to maybe be buried or cremated in a way that doesn't really align with your values during your life. And that's why it's so important to have these types of events. Really get educated on all the options, because there are a lot of options out there, and some are for some people and others are for other people. And, there's no real wrong or real right. Every death or every funeral is going to have a carbon footprint, and people pick and choose where they want to go green. So there are shades of green. So for example, it's not uncommon for us to drive to the Sunport and put an empty willow casket on a plane and ship it somewhere across the country. And what that speaks to, from my perspective, is the importance to that family to have that product. And so they're willing to look past the carbon footprint of flying a casket on an airplane for the funeral. We've had families drive from San Antonio, Texas, to pick up caskets from us. That's a 14-hour drive each way. Is that eco-friendly? Is that low carbon footprint? Not really, right? But that speaks to how important it is. And so, I think for people to be educated about their options and to pre-plan is so important. And that's probably the best way to get what you want when the time arrives. So I applaud Gail, and Gail's been doing it for many years. And so thank you for putting this together. And yeah, welcome. And thanks for all coming and learning more about the options.
Well said. Thank you, Gail. Appreciate it. Yeah, I love the idea of the shades of green, right? We at Natural Burial New Mexico and La Puerta, we believe in simplicity. So no embalming, simple containers, family-led services. So it's all how we see green is it being simpler.
What are some of the simplest steps that people could take to make their funeral more eco-friendly?
Yeah, I mean, carpooling to the place, that's one.
That's a start.
You know,
Place for
right?
here.
Yeah, coordinating online, just doing a lot of that front end work is really important because, yeah, I mean, nobody wants to deal with the, coordinating in the moment. They want to grieve, so it's important to do a lot of things on the front end. But yeah, I'm trying to think of other ways to make it more eco-friendly besides the carpooling. Yeah, I think that's. Do you have anything?
Well, I'm definitely biased. Obviously, the products you choose can make a big
Right.
difference, right? I mean, if you choose an 18 gauge steel casket versus a hand woven bamboo, there's a big difference in impact there. Whether you choose natural burial in a hand dug grave at a green cemetery, there's a big difference between that and either a cremation or a conventional burial. But like I said before, I'm not sure there's an exact wrong or right. It depends on who the person is. And we, for example, at Passages hear from families and funeral directors that choose to embalm a body, put them in one of our woven caskets, and bury it in a traditional cemetery in a vault. And for that consumer, that was a small step, right? And so we don't judge whether it's a small step or a big step. I think Brian has he has the big green step, right? Which is there's no embalming, there's no vaults, there's no headstones, it's eco-friendly shrouds or caskets. That's the dark green version. But there is everything on the spectrum.
I would call it the bright green.
The
version.
bright green. Okay, the bright green.
Okay.
Okay, the bright green version. Okay. I said there's variations of green, didn't I?
Yeah, I did.
So I'm
Did.
foreign, what can I say? Yeah.
I think my response is education. Educating yourself on what it is that you find important and making the decisions for yourself and not leaving that in the hands of whoever's left behind to make those decisions for you. I would say that in my experience, it's 15 years as a funeral director, the funeral homes that I worked with when the family had planned in advance were some of the smoothest and most impactful for the people left behind. There was a lot less decision making to be made. They basically knew that they were making the wishes of their parent done. Like everything was recorded, everything was completed. And so all they had to do is say, yep, we're going to stick with mom's plans. There's so much amazing piece in that, right? There's no second guessing. Well, what would she have wanted? What did we want to do? That's huge. Educating yourself on the options. And then if there's an option that you want and it's not available where you are, find a way to get in touch with the people in your state that make those kind of things happen. So for example, composting, it is not legal everywhere yet. I'm a huge advocate of it. I think it's amazing. Having seen the process in person, when it first rolled out in Washington, I was a little paranoid and freaked out about it because I was unaware of how it all worked. After seeing it, there's no question in my mind that is an amazing way to choose to go through the end of life process. As it's becoming more available in different states, it's because of people, doulas, funeral directors, the community raising awareness and fighting for it in their states. And so if that is something that you're looking for and it's not yet legal where you are, being vocal about it is a big component. Yeah, I think really truly education, learning for yourself and making the decisions and getting it on paper and recorded for family to find.
I got something to add to that.
But, okay.
I want to add to that. So I think the other thing is taking control. I mean, it's your
Mhm.
funeral, it's
Mhm.
your family's funeral, right? And I think a lot of the way it's been done for the last 50 to 100 years has been pretty cookie cutter, and it doesn't have to be that way, right? And we see similar things happening in the wedding business, right? Everyone used to get married in a church, not so much anymore, right? Everyone used to get born in a hospital, not so much anymore, right? So you can take control of your own death care wishes, and really take that back. And when I talk to people like Brian, I talk to other people around the country, and even with some of the stuff Jess has said, it can be very, very powerful to take control of that back, versus, the conventional industry, not because they're trying to rip you off or do something bad, but I think that comes from a place of trying to help. So, for example, somebody dies, you have a dead body at your home. What are you going to do? Well, you call the funeral home. What they do is they come and they whisk that body away. And then 3 days later, you see that body, it's embalmed and it looks like it's still alive. And then 24 hours later, that body is buried and boom, problem is solved, right? Whereas when you look at people who are doing more natural burial, they're letting, they're leaving the body at home and spending time with the body, right? They may be bathing or dressing the body. They may be digging the grave or filling the grave. There's a huge honorary component to that. And there's a huge grief component to that, because if you are there spending time with that deceased individual, if you're bathing or shrouding or filling the grave, that helps you start to cope and realize. The conventional industry, from a good place, has tried to help you solve a problem that you have. But in actual fact, I think it's robbed people of the ability to come to terms with the fact that a death has occurred and start to heal, right? And so everyone here can make that more of a reality, because if funeral directors understand and if funeral homes understand that, they'll be more willing to come to your home to not remove the body or not expect to remove the body right away. So I think it's really important to take control of it and be educated.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's perfect. That nailed it.
I want to add
Nailed
that.
it. Essentially, yeah, home funerals is a lot of what Darren's speaking
Yeah.
about. And funeral homes are a convenience, people can do home funerals. It's just how much do you want to do? So yeah, that's exactly right. Like, you can take some autonomy back in your loved one's death, or, planning for your own and what you want that to look like. Perfect.
Okay. Somebody today while we were walking around pointed out that like this room is predominantly filled with women. And I'm here to tell you that so is the funeral industry going forward. Right now, as we speak, the majority of people entering to mortuary school is like 85 to 90% women. So the change is coming. We love that. I love that as a woman in the profession who started when it was not that way. But what I will say to that is, one of the things that I encountered a lot when I was working as a funeral director too is that families would come into us in duress. And the first thing that they would say, well, what does everybody else do? So I don't think that funerals have always became this cookie cutter thing because we've kind of demanded it. It's more along the lines of, we're just putting people in boxes because people aren't ready to make those decisions when we need them to make decisions. And so they kind of get put into this, we're going to put you in this box because it's kind of what you're talking about, what you want. And you're not ready to make bigger choices right now because you're grieving. Whereas I find that families who do plan in advance have more colorful experiences because all of it's already recorded. So the kids can come in, or the husband or the wife or whoever's left behind can go, okay, so all the big decisions have been made. How do we make this amazing? Because a huge chunk of the pressure is already gone. And so again, writing it down and recording it. And I will say also that the younger group that's coming in is very open to what you're looking for, right? So a lot of funeral directors that I know who are newer in the industry, less than 10 years, are super open to the concepts of, you want to bring them home? Great. Let's figure out how to make that work. If we can do it, we'll do it. If you want to delay us picking up, great, let's do it. Like, a lot of us are very comfortable with doing that, but it has to be coming from you, because we cannot suggest that to families. We can kind of guide if you're looking for that, but we're not going to suggest it. So we want to make sure that educating yourself and like talking with, and even if you're utilizing a doula, I've had many doulas call the funeral home and say, I have a family, they're not ready for you to come, but I want to let you know that their father has passed away. Can we have 24 hours? And I'm like, sure thing, no problem. Do you want us to bring ice? I will ask those questions, but there has to be the communication between the two.
Just to add to that real quick. Sorry. On her data, you know, she mentioned a lot of females are coming into the profession, which is great. I heard a stat that said 60% of all funeral directors are going to retire in the next 5 years.
Yes.
So that compounds that change. So we're
Big
going to
time.
see a huge change in the industry where people are going to come in much more open to these things. I think one of the things we do need to work on is mortuary schools, because I still think most funeral directors don't learn about this, or if they do, it's one day out of their whole curriculum. You know what I mean?
It was exactly 2 credits,
Was it 2 credits? Okay, there you go.
which means that it was a total of 40 hours in a full quarter.
Right. And you know, the irony is that, you know, a lot of you guys are comfortable with these types of products, but a lot of funeral directors are not. They've never seen it before. They've never touched it. They're not sure what to do if something goes wrong. So yeah.
And actually, to pick up on that
Cooking.
point, so the National Funeral Directors Association just had their convention in New Orleans.
Yes.
Woo,
It was fun.
I got to miss it, but what were you hearing from funeral directors about both Better
Okay,
Place Force
okay.
and your product?
My super exciting announcement. When we think of green experiences, the last places we think of are the South and Texas. The funeral homes that had the most interest in what we were providing and what we were doing was the South and Texas. When are you coming to Texas? When are you coming to the Carolinas? When are you coming to Texas? So I am super, super excited to see that, because that means that the movement is actually starting to push its way through the traditional sections of funeral care in our country, which is huge. Another thing that did happen at NFDA that I was super excited to attend was there was a panel discussion from a death doula representative and a funeral director representative who talked about the symbiosis relationship that funeral directors and doulas can create in their communities. It was well attended and very well received from funeral directors and older funeral directors. I would have never imagined, but when we walked out of that room, there was a good 100 people who were like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that's what doulas did. So I think part of that whole experience is communication. You as doulas, or the people who are doulas in this room, getting to know your funeral homes in your community and having a conversation about how can I better help you and how can you help me? Because we as funeral directors just don't know that they're even in our communities until the family calls and says, so we're working with a doula. And I'm like, oh, who? I don't, what? So just kind of reach out. You won't get pushback, I promise. And if you do, call me. I'll stand up for you. And I will say that if you are in a state that has a funeral directors association, start attending. Like, we don't as funeral directors learn about what's available and what is in our communities until things start showing up. And I think communication and education on both sides is very, very, very important. There was a huge group of funeral directors at convention that had no idea what death doulas even were. And so when they sat down in that room and discussed how doulas work and what the concepts are behind that process, they walked out of there feeling like, oh my gosh, here I thought they were after my job. No, they're not. They don't want your part. Division, it's okay. But it was a very big opening eye for a lot of people who just didn't understand the relationship between the two different categories, which is beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I think about over the last 25 years, as I've talked to funeral directors, a lot of times they would say things like, I would be talking to them from a sales perspective, trying to sell them these products, and they would say, well, no one's asking for this. Well, it's like no one's asking, like I said before with my Prius example, because you don't have it out in front. You keep it in the back room. It's like, how on earth do you expect to sell it if you're making customers ask for it? Yeah, I mean, so I've seen a tremendous amount of change. And as I spoke to funeral professionals at the convention, we've definitely seen that change where it used to be sort of, why should I do this? Why should I offer these products? More to how do I offer these products? And so I think the public is doing a better job of demanding it and expressing interest in it. And so funeral directors are figuring out that this is a legitimate thing that people want. And it makes perfect sense when you look around the broader economy and people are driving more EVs, more flex fuel, you know, they're putting solar on their house. It just makes perfect sense, right? So it's definitely about to take a huge increase in popularity, I think.
So I didn't go to the convention, but I do work with a lot of funeral directors, and yeah, I think it's a lot of just they don't know what you want. Last week I talked to advanced planner who's like, I get told 4 times a week that people are interested in green funeral and green burial. So we're going to set a time next month to chat more about that. And it's like, we work with funeral homes all the time, but they like to work with the convenience of what they know. So they know their space really well. They don't want to anger anybody at the top by, you know, getting out of that, but I don't know how much that is, but there's a hierarchy. You got to stay in line. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, like they say, if you talk about it more, you request it more, the demand will change the industry. I always use the analogy that like planning a funeral is like planning a wedding, but this is one that you're going to have a week to plan instead of months in
Months and
advance.
years, yeah.
So it's good to know what you want way ahead of time.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So obviously you are all actively engaged in marketing and outreach in terms of educating funeral directors and funeral homes about green services, right? How can you have more impact on the curriculum in the mortuary school?
Ooh,
So-
yeah.
I don't have an answer.
Okay. Education board at the ABFSC, which is the American Board of Funeral Service Education, is extremely difficult to crack. It is like trying to talk to them like a bar exam group, right? So we have been asking for it for years and years and years and years and years and years, and they're finally starting to listen a little bit to what we're saying. But what I've been doing is I've been reaching out to program coordinators at the different colleges and saying, hey, if I bring in myself and this lovely gentleman here and a couple other people who can talk specifically about green burial, green experiences, eco-friendly options, can we have a full day or two of like curriculum time with your students? And the overwhelming answer is absolutely. They want to teach these students about green options because it is the future and they are not ignorant to that. The group of people that are educating the future of the funeral industry are predominantly women. And so there is a lot of that exposure level too, but they also know that it's a high interest of a lot of the students going through the programs. We are seeing a lot of people who have both death doula and funeral home licensing. So they're getting their funeral director's license after working as a doula for a short period of time and deciding that they want more access to families with a funeral home. We do see people who go to school, get their funeral director's license, and then add on the doula part afterwards. So we are seeing a lot more green hybridization happening in those spaces already. So I don't know that we'll ever get it required anytime soon, but we are forcing it to become part of like the communication and the processes in the schools.
Yeah, and we, I think I spoke at 3 or 4 mortuary schools this year. We're also providing product and merchandise so that students can actually look at it and learn about it. You know, a lot of the mortuary schools, they are set up in a way that they're trying to replicate what you might experience working in a funeral home. So, you know, a lot of them, so I was in Southern Illinois in Carbondale at Southern Illinois University earlier this year. And I gave a presentation to every one of their 4 years. They have a 4-year degree mortuary school, and they have an embalming room, and they actually have a crematory as well. And so they're doing some embalmings and stuff for the medical school, and they're doing cremations. And so those students are getting their cremation certificates. They're practicing embalmings. They also have rooms that are set up similar, but not nearly as beautiful as this, in terms of showrooms and selection rooms, and they're starting to integrate this type of product and this type of education, but it's been a long time coming.
It's been slow.
Yeah, we're not too much into the funeral director education part. So but what we do is educate through that's how we market, right? We educate people on how they can, you know, make a difference with their loved one passing and what kind of stuff they can do on the front end. And I think that just alone is creating that energy for people to ask those questions to funeral directors. Because we often say, you know, funeral homes, like you can do a lot yourself, but they're a convenience, right? They have refrigeration. They can push the pause button for you. They can allow you that time to grieve and plan and stuff like that. So that's more where we stand.
We've got you. Okay, so I will say that when I do presentations, I don't focus on just what we do at Better Place Forests, because there is something for everybody. And I do talk about conservational burial, and I do talk about natural and green burial, and the difference between hybrids versus conventional or conservation level, because we can't always get all of the people in the room. And so I think it's very important that people get educated on what the options are so that they can better help the consumers. But I try to touch on you.
Oh, no, yeah,
Because I don't
you're
think
great.
it's fair. I don't think it's fair to like only represent one piece, right? So if I'm going to go into a space and I'm teaching students, especially, I'm going to make sure I give as much as knowledge base as I can. So I try to like talk a little bit about alkaline hydrolysis and NOR, even though I'm not an expert and I'm still learning about them. I think it's important that we kind of talk about them and that they are options so that they can better talk with people about them too.
And that was my next question.
Yay.
Let's talk about alkaline hydrolysis, which is a relatively new development in the field, as
Yes.
well as natural organic reduction, also known as body composting. So who wants to, well, you said you know a bit about it.
Yeah.
Darren, you got to see all 3 of the
Mhm.
NORs in Seattle.
Yeah.
Why don't you talk about that?
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I've been a little skeptical about NOR.
Yeah.
But I went to see all 3. There's 3 different companies in the Seattle area that do natural organic reduction. There's also one in Denver. Are there more than that?
No,
No,
not yet.
I think there's 4 of them, but it's legal in like 10 or 15 states.
So it's been legalized, but not for practice yet. So Minnesota is the next state that gets the ability to do human composting, and that goes into effect July of 2025. And then everyone after that will slowly start to roll because
Right.
of their, like
So I think-
California is a little slow on the
I
draw.
think one of the things to kind of to look at is alkali hydrolysis has actually been around longer than natural organic reduction. But I
Talk
think
about that process. What does that look like?
so. Alkali hydrolysis is it's the process. It's the processing of the body with chemical versus flame, right? Do you have a better way?
Yeah. here.
Yeah.
Go on.
So
Well,
much better.
That's not the marketing spiel.
Yeah.
That's the real spiel.
So
Yeah.
yeah, with heat temperature, you can dissolve body's tissues with essentially, I think it's lye.
Yeah, it's a small amount of lye.
Yeah. And so what you have at the end of that is bone that you kind of do the same production of cremated remains where they have to go through they have to be grinded down.
Yeah.
Processed to
Yeah.
the consistency. And then I think there's the only thing that I know of is that there's kind of an issue with the disposition of that liquid. And in the state of New Mexico, I don't know that it'll ever be legal anytime soon, just because we have so many water restrictions and so much
Okay.
so much desert. But here, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So the alkaline hydrolysis process uses less water than a standard person's shower.
Oh, wow.
It is not making an ecological impact on our water usage at all. If you lose a person and you use one shower, which means, most people shower more than once a week, right? So that's like, we're still at a similar, if not less water use based on that concept, right? So the water thing isn't really an issue. The effluent off the machine is the big issue that most municipalities are having. The stuff that comes out of that machine after cremation process is done is the part that most places are concerned about, because they're a little concerned about, prions and diseases and your body, like skin and tissue and everything is in that water. It's broken down very heavily. However, I do know that there are facilities in the Northeast that have introduced this into their communities, as well as in San Diego, and every community that has done it has stated from their water system and their water treatment plants that the actual treatment plants are showing massive less cost on their end because of the alkaline level that comes out of these machines is helping balance the pH levels of their actual sewage systems. So There isn't really a negative to this whatsoever. If your machine's running with solar power, you have even more of a reason why it's super ecologically friendly versus flame cremation. There's not a negative. The problem is getting communities and cities to give us the permits to do it, because they're like, A, water use, B, water afterwards is kind of like, what are you putting in there? But the reality is that your standard bathroom is putting more in that sewage system that's kind of rank compared to this. Like, it's not a thing.
And it's good fertilizer.
And it's
too.
really good fertilizer. So there are cemeteries that are utilizing it as well to help fertilize their properties, not the areas like the grass, but like the flower beds. And they're seeing incredible results from the actual fertilization process of like this product going into the plant beds. And they do disclose that with families and get permission before they do it usually.
So is the resistance just not knowing?
It's education and knowledge. Absolutely. Yeah. So every time I get a community that's having a hard time doing it, there's a group of 4 or 5 people that I know of that go in and they start really educating the city council about what exactly this is and how it works, so that we can get through that process.
And it uses 1/10 of the energy.
Yes, a 10th of
flame.
the energy of flame cremation. So in the grand scheme of things, cremation itself is not actually very eco-friendly at all. If you compare it to aquamation and NOR, there's absolutely no one would choose flame cremation if you saw the actual ecological imprint of the 3 options. That being said, there are cultures that will always use flame cremation because of the fact that it's a spiritual thing of letting the soul release from the body. It's a little hard to construct that idea when you're talking about the alkaline hydrolysis process, because you're in water and it kind of can suffocate that concept of the soul escaping the body. However, overall, most people would probably choose a bath over fire.
I think there's except if you're in Breaking Bad.
Valid.
You know, we are in Breaking Bad territory over here, guys. It doesn't happen in a bathtub,
No, it's not.
except on Breaking Bad.
Just on Breaking Bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a little bit of an ick factor, and I think also the religious part of it. I think the Catholic Church has some issues with stuff going into the sewer.
Yeah, they had a
Part of
problem with
you-
the separation of that was
Right.
the part of
So,
that too.
you know, everything has its pros and its cons,
Mhm.
right? For sure.
So if you live somewhere where it's not legal, state where it's not legal, is it legal to go and?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So we
Yeah.
do see that a lot. So because Washington State was the first state that allowed people to do the composting portion, they a lot of the facilities that do composting in the state of Washington are seeing people from all over the country come in. So the only thing that they ask is that you have a funeral home that you work with there, because you're going to have to send that person, and permitting is a little difficult and a little tricky, but they are able to make it happen. And then they return the soil to that family they freight ship it, or families have driven across country and picked up the compost, or they've donated it to whatever reforestation project that company is currently working on too.
Yeah, definitely. There's funeral homes in Albuquerque that are transporting people up to Colorado currently.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in terms of natural or organic reduction, so there's kind of 2 industries, so there's like kind of an industrial process that we're seeing, and then there's like, I can't remember I'll try to find it.
Oh, Hurlin Forest.
Yeah. They're doing it by nature only. Like they put the person in a cradle with a bunch of alfalfa, wood chips, and they turn the cradle, and it takes about 3 to 6 months.
3 to 6 months for their
Yeah,
process. Yeah.
and then but the industrial process is going a little bit faster, right? Because they're applying heat and
Nope.
No,
They're
not-
it's
it's-
self-generated.
It's self-generated.
Well,
The
through
only thing that
through
they
the
have running
microbes.
through the system is oxygen. So they
Oh, that's what
they
it is.
pump a small amount of oxygen through the system and pull off gas, and that's
Gotcha.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, right, because the microbes heat up to
Yeah.
a certain temperature. That's how you know their body is breaking down.
Yeah.
But
Looks
so
like,
there's
looks like
Yeah,
mulch.
like mulch.
yeah, so there's the same processing of the bones and then put back in, and then they give it a little bit more time. But yeah, you get about almost like a
A whole
yard.
cubic yard.
Yeah,
it's a
yard
lot.
of earth, which is a
Pickup
lot.
truck work. Yeah.
Yeah.
How much?
A yard,
A cubic yard.
A pickup truck.
It's a pickup truck
One
full.
person?
Yes.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
casket full.
Is-
What's the process of removing the whole joints and things like that? when you're-
that's when they are breaking the long bones down, they'll remove titanium and stuff like that, and medical devices.
Mhm.
Did you say this is legal in Colorado?
It is legal in Colorado. I think Natural Funeral is doing it. And so, yeah, it does require the body to be shipped up there and then it to come back, but that is something that people in New Mexico can access.
Yeah.
Why don't you talk about the natural process at La Puerta, how a
So-
body's buried there?
Yeah, so we're
Yeah.
trying our best to kind of mimic that in a passive way. So by just laying them in the earth. So what we do is we dig 3.5 to 4 feet. Our graves are 3.5 to 4 feet. We line the bottom with wood chips and close the grave. So the idea being that the wood chips would help hold some of the moisture for longer because we're in such an arid climate that we want that time for the body to process. And yeah, that's mainly it because we only get about a foot of annual rainfall per year in New Mexico. So, I have to do a lot of watering of willow trees to get them established and stuff like that. But yeah.
I think it's very interesting, and I think the funeral industry, again, like they handled cremation poorly, they handled green burial poorly. And had they allowed green burial in conventional cemeteries that were already open, then this disruption probably would not have taken hold quite so quickly. Because if you think about it, like I talked about earlier on in my presentation, every other living thing that dies, there is already this thing called life cycle, right? The earth knows how to reduce a body because it does it for every other living thing. So the question is, do we need an industrial artificial process to do something that Mother Nature does on its own, right? In some places, yes, and for some people, yes, but for other people, no.
So Brian, so you take the body there and I assume it takes a while. And
Yeah.
then that's just where they're buried. Is there any marker, any?
Yeah,
structure?
so yeah, we mound the grave, right? And people can mark the grave with, personal stones. They can decorate the whole burial mound with stones, or they can plant native species of plants, or we do also make headstones out of flagstone, so they can still have markers. Yeah, it's and that earth has been, it's kind of been aerated a little bit, so it's going to take time to naturally go back down. That's why we mound them, so it's easy to find someone. But also once, a willow basket will eventually degrade, there's a bit of volume inside there, so we have to have earth there for that. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So if you're buried just in a shroud.
Right.
That would be a quicker.
Yeah, yeah. Right, because it's just cotton or bamboo or yeah, something simple,
So
closer to the earth. We we also use the willow carriers a lot, like the willow carriers that they offer, Passages offers, and those are great too. You're adding more carbon in there too to retain moisture.
So in the cremation, different kinds of deterioration of bodies, you're removing the titanium, but at natural burial,
Mhm.
your body goes and your
Yeah.
devices.
Sure, yeah, and for us, we want to be as little invasive as possible, right? We're not going to have someone get both their knees removed. Some people do donate, their bones or organs and stuff like that. So we do have to kind of work with different, funeral homes to, instead of using PVC pipe for, this might be morbid, but you use something like more organic to replicate that.
cornstarch,
Cornstarch,
yeah,
there you go.
yeah.
But yeah, so
they
uh,
exist.
yeah, and so what's the natural forest up in
Which one?
the one that's doing the composting and the
Oh,
grills?
Holland?
Herland, they're
Yeah.
also doing a new method now where they have pipes going into the ground and they're providing oxygen to the burial. And if it needs, I don't know how they're testing for moisture, but
I'm not pretty
but
sure on
yeah,
it.
so they're trying to do the composting in the earth now. That's kind of the next step. That's what a huge reason why we started adding wood chips. We let artists add paper, or we had a cowboy have a bunch of hay in there. So yeah,
How big is your property?
it's 82 acres, 40 of which are deeded cemetery.
There's a comment online from Sherry Burns saying there was a bill here in New Mexico to
Oh.
legalize NOR, but it never made it out of committee.
Mhm.
Yep.
I've reached out to Liz Stefanix to see if she's interested in updating the bill and reintroducing it. But unfortunately, haven't heard back from her. If she's reelected, I'll keep on reaching out to her.
Yep, Liz did try to get that pushed and it got, I think what the word is in the funeral industry is two funeral directors.
Killed it.
They basically they kind of made it sound like you just put the body out in a field and they didn't, there were,
Lack
Yeah.
of education.
exactly. And that's where like, yeah, I think it'll change, but it's gonna take time.
In our bill.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I know Liz, I'll ask her.
yeah.
tell her to hit me up. We'll work together.
Let's talk about the ocean, the sea. What are the rules for cremated disposition at sea? And I know if you've been in the Navy, I believe you can
You-
have whole body
You can do it in,
disposition.
yeah, yeah. So anyone can actually be buried at sea full body. It's not just military. The military will do the process for you if you were in the Navy. So there are private companies that will help you be buried at sea if that's what you want to do. So two things, burial at sea, I'm not a huge fan of, and I'll tell you why. One, they require it to be a metal casket. So we're adding junk, more stuff to the water that I'm not a big fan of. They claim it creates ecosystems in the bedrock of like the ocean, but we don't go down that far, so I don't know how they can answer to that really. I don't see a lot of coral reefs that deep. They have to do it, I believe it's 25 nautical miles off of the coast. And they have to make sure that there's holes drilled into the casket, there's weights put into the casket, and it has to be sealed. So the holes are to make sure the air comes out so that it goes down. They claim that once they're in the water, the body itself inside the casket is usually been eaten by most of the animals in the water within 30 days. So I don't know. For me, but I would be a better proponent for like advocating for it if it wasn't for the fact that they ask that we use metal to go out. The Navy also requires it to be a metal container too. They used to allow wood, but they have found that the wood breaks apart really quickly and ends up on shores. And so that's why they've stopped using it, because chunks of caskets would wash up on beaches. And that was not really something that they were kind of fond of. So that's why they've kind of gone to the metals. You can put cremated remains out to sea as well. So that same concept, they just ask that you're at least 5 nautical yards off of the coast, because contrary to
Miles, not
belief,
yards.
it's mile. Yeah, miles. Sorry.
Yeah.
They want you to be off of the coast. Now, that being said, no one ever goes that far out. I would say most people probably go maybe a quarter mile, maybe half mile off the coast, if that. I've seen groups of surfers go out on their boards and kind of congregate and place remains in the ocean as well. The only thing that I would suggest is utilizing a Passage's biodegradable urn. And the reason behind that is because of the fact that cremated remains float. They do not sink. And so if we're putting stuff into the ocean like cremated remains and they float, they end up right back on our beaches where our children play. And I don't know that that's something that all of us really want people to be scraping through our loved ones. So that's one of the reasons why they, one, ask for it to be so far offshore, and two, we really need to be using biodegradable containers when we're doing it.
Well said.
Thanks.
I'm not sure I have that much more to add to that, but I could, I can tell you it's very, very popular. I know,
Yeah.
I think Batesville is the big casket company, sort of publicly traded Fortune 500 company, recently sold. As you can imagine, casket sales are declining a little bit. But they did a study early on and they found that 70% of people that scatter want to do it in or over water. So there is definitely an attraction to doing it over the water. Water is life-giving, right? There's a symbolism there on the beach at sunset or off the back of a cruise ship. It is very, very popular, but it has to be done the right way.
Well, and talk about the design, about floating and then sinking gracefully.
Yeah, we have urns that are made from the same material, but some of them we recommend for water burial and some we don't. And it's not a biodegradability issue, it's a floating issue. So urns that are designed to go in the water are designed to take on water relatively quickly and emit air relatively quickly. And now, as Jess mentioned in her example earlier on, we always don't know how much cremated remains is going to be in an urn. So the other thing that affects how long something takes to sink is the weight. A lot of our urns are quite light. And so if you're not putting sort of a full set of remains, which typically weigh 6 to 8 pounds, that urn can take longer to sink. And so we encourage people to pay attention to that. And if they are, say, splitting the remains and scattering somewhere else, or they're putting them in a cemetery and they only have half the remains, they may want to add some additional weight to that urn in the form of beach sand or river pebbles or seashells, something like that, that will give it a little bit of weight to sink.
Yeah, I don't have much to contribute to those. So I'll pass it back.
Any last thoughts there, Chris?
Yeah, we're not even
Yeah.
touching the ocean.
I will say that one thing to consider if you're utilizing one of the passages urns and you're going out to like place in water is thinking on how long you do want this item to float or not float. I have a personal experience where we took one of the passages urns out and placed my grandfather, and it floated way longer than I wanted it to. And so it kind of became more of a like, oh my gosh, please go down moment versus like,
You were breaking the law, weren't you?
yes, but so that is now on record. But it's one of those moments where like, if you're in a situation where you're trying to be discreet and you're wanting to like make sure that like we're not floating for a long period of time, or because of the fact that you don't want your boat to be out there for a long time, or you want the symbolism of it just going faster, add the weight. It's worth it. I would suggest pebbles, rocks, anything that is environmentally friendly. Please don't put metals and stuff like that inside there. That completely defeats the point. But keep that in mind. So most of his water urns are 5 to 7 minutes. I did not know that at the time. Had I known that, I would have added way more weight.
plus 5 minutes can feel like 30 minutes
It
when you're like looking around for
Yes.
park ranger.
So that too. And on the back of a cruise ship, it's the same concept. So when you're putting it off of the back of a cruise ship, whether it's a ferry or an actual like larger cruise ship, 5 minutes feels like forever when the people who are operating this boat are staring at you going, okay, are you done now? Are we ready to move on this cruise? And so keep that in mind. One thing I always suggest to families when they say they're going to scatter at sea versus whether it's kayaks or boats or utilizing a ferry system or a cruise ship is having flowers and things like that, so that put the weight in the actual vessel so that it goes down a little quicker, and then put flowers out so that as you're leaving that space, because when you're in water, there's no pausing of motion. So that boat will continue to move whether the engines are on or not. And so you'll slowly start to see the flowers kind of be behind, and it gives a much more beautiful experience versus you watching this thing like sink away. So it kind of creates a more pretty experience.
Nothing.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to say is, what was I going to say? Let's see. Check your local regulations.
Yeah.
You don't want to do it in protected waters. All of our urns are not designed to be used from the end of a pier or from the beach. They're really designed for deep water. So make sure you know what you can and can't do in the place where you're going to do it.
Yeah.
Unlike Jess.
I know nothing.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
Yeah. Allegedly, yes. I just heard it from
Allegedly.
So I'm going to share a story about dumping cremated remains off of a cruise ship. You're not supposed to do that. I'm not going to say what cruise line it was, but my brother-in-law had died. He was cremated. He was very big in the metaphysical field. My family was going on a cruise to Bermuda, so we were in the Bermuda Triangle.
Makes perfect sense.
So at sunset on formal night, we're up there on the walkway deck, and it was one of those huge ships. And my brother had tried to scatter some of the cremated remains off the back of the ship, and of course they blew back in his face.
Yep.
And then he was like, okay, we're just gonna dump them all in a bag and then throw it off the boat. And I looked at the bag because he had it was like a sparkly laminated kind of bag. And I was like, this is not eco-friendly. We need to get a different, we need a paper bag. And so we went to the shop on the ship and it said, do you have a paper bag? And they were like, sure. And they gave us the paper bag. And it said, get out there. So
I
we
love
got
that.
out there at sunset and we waved goodbye and we sang Somewhere Beyond the Sea. It was beautiful.
Oh, I love that.
And totally illegal.
And all the passengers on their patios as the bag descended,
right.
getting just this dust in their faces.
Like a
Have it-
rock.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so clarification about cruise ships. Most cruise ships will allow you to place cremated remains off the back of the cruise ship. You have to reach out to them well in advance. So 30, 60 days before your planned trip, I would say, give them a call and say, hey, is there a possibility we could make that happen? They will tell you when, they will tell you where, they'll tell you how. You don't get to dictate that part, unfortunately. So if it is a Bermuda Triangle issue and you're wanting it in a specific place, you might want to rent your own boat. But they do require that it is in a biodegradable container. Like
And
you
I think,
cannot scatter. We know a guy. So you cannot scatter off the back of the cruise ships. And the reason why is because it blows right back up to the boat. And so we, not only is that not cool for like your experience, but it also can affect the people that are also on that cruise that didn't know your dad. So let's not do that. Also, there is permitting that's required for that because it's an international water scatter. So that's one of the reasons why they will dictate where you can do it, because they can only do it in international waters. So once they've crossed into an area that is considered part of another country's territory, that cannot happen. So they will tell you when you're in a space where that can happen. I've worked with many cruise lines with families in the past of making this happen, everyone from Disney on up. And so I know it is a possibility. Disney is the easiest to work with, to be surprisingly enough. They are very open to it, especially if it's a child that's been lost. They're like, we'll make it happen. We'll figure it out. We'll give the family some selections of dates and times when we can do it, when we will be international watered. So they'll pause the boat, they'll stop the boat, they'll stop all activity on the boat during that time, at least on Disney, and it was amazing. The family came back with glowing reports on how it went. So it is possible, but you have to communicate what you need, because you can't show up during your cruise, walk up to somebody that works there and say, can we do this? The answer is going to be no, because they have to plan so far in advance for that.
Yeah, and we've also been asked for certificates of biodegradability. So on our website, next to the products, we provide the. I'm not sure if all cruise ships
Some
require it or if it's a relatively new thing, but we often get calls from funeral directors working with families that know they're going to go on a cruise, and the cruise line is asking for a certificate that item is biodegradable. So we provide that. You know, the other thing that just kind of came to mind was kind of scattering, but I knew a guy in Southern California that scattered out of an airplane. After a while he stopped doing it because it took the paint off the side of his airplane, because as you're scattering it out, I mean, it's hard, it's hard, right? So it took the paint off the side of his airplane.
So we have a comment online. I have a client in Santa Fe who has arranged burial at sea. Fun fact, Southwest Airlines has agreed to let her pay for shipping her body to LA using her frequent flyer.
True story. Yep, you can do that. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, didn't know
That's
that.
not the first I've heard that. So I've seen that before. Surprisingly enough. I love Southwest. They're very helpful. They're one of the few airlines that does that though. So they're great partners. They do help us out a lot.
They transport unembalmed bodies and
Yeah.
as well.
They're one of the few airlines that won't bat an eye at that too. Like there's a few that hate it and they're like, no, but Southwest has always worked well with us whenever we need to send somebody that's unembalmed.
Audience question.
One over here.
Oh, over there, yes.
I was recently reading about an open air pyre in Colorado, and I was wondering, I just seemed like New Mexico is a really great place for that, but I had not did a little digging and did not see. I was wondering if anyone knew about the regulations.
So it's
The question is.
Oh yeah. So the question is in regards to the open air pyre cremation concepts, that it is technically allowed in Colorado, but there are very strict stipulations about who can access that. So you have to be part of the community that it is authorized for. And I believe it's a tribal community from what I remember, or is it not? It's Crestone. Yeah. Yeah. So you have to live in that community to actually get access to that. You cannot come in from another state to get access to it right now. That's one of the stipulations that are part of that. I don't know if we'll see it go everywhere. I hope so. I'm a big advocate for it's not my decision and choice on like what people want. Like, in my opinion, everything should be an option. Let people decide. That's your choice, right? So, I'm hopeful that we'll see it show up in other places. I know it showed up in Minnesota as the Jedi Law many years ago, like 3 or 4 years ago, and it got stopped very quickly. They tried very hard to make it happen because open air pyre, like cremation, is something that a lot of cultures would definitely lean to if they had options for it. The concerns, I think, from this regulation level is how do you prevent people from seeing that who don't want to see it? Sometimes the smell and the odors from that process can be very, very intrusive, as well as the visual. And so how do you protect people in those situations who come to this event not knowing what they're walking into? And I think that's the biggest concern in most states. Another example of something different that does exist is that in Arizona, there's still sky burial happening on tribal land. So that is where the person is placed on the pyre and they are left there for the vultures and the actual like life on earth to take their body and flesh from the bone. Once the flesh is gone from the bone, they pull the bones down and will bury the bones. So I know that's accessible only for tribal members in certain areas of Arizona. And I've been lucky enough to see it. And I don't know if it would be for me, but I think it's awesome that it's an option for somebody who has that spiritual connection to it. And I would love to see people have access to it if it's something they want. We have a really bad habit in this country of gatekeeping things and not allowing people to access stuff because of our personal fears and our political or religious views as far as our government goes. And I think that has to change because more and more people are starting to ask for things that are a little bit more on the weird side. Another good example is Viking burials. Same concept is that's a kind of an open pyre sort of experience, but on water, right? So I once had a family who was of Icelandic descent and they came to our funeral home and they said, we want to have a Viking burial. And I said, it's not legal here in the United States, like at all. And they were like, well, how can we hybrid that? Like, what do we do? And I said, look, we can have cremation done in advance and then place the urn on a boat of some kind and then push it out and then set that on fire. And the son was like, absolutely. And so that's what we ended up doing. And so you find a way. I mean, was it perfect? No, but it was perfect for what we had options for. So I think that we need to like be vocal about what we're looking for in this space, right? And I think the more people who start screaming from the rafters that like we want these options, at some point they're gonna just get tired of us and make it happen for us. So like keep screaming. Yeah, so that's a really, really good question. So he was asking about alkaline hydrolysis and like sometimes, okay, so clarification. Sometimes with cremation, people have the option to kind of come in and look through and do what we call as funeral directors bone picking, where they'll pull out the long bones and stuff like that and not pulverize them. It's usually done in Buddhist tradition. We don't see it a lot in most communities, but Buddhists tend to lean towards that. What they like to do, for example, is when they place people in their urns, they want them stacked in the right order. So feet, knees, hips, chest, head. Like that's how they want them placed in the urn. And so we have to very carefully pull certain pieces out, pulverize everything, and then put stuff slowly into their containers to the urn. And so it's something that is done. So one of the questions, what he asked though, was as far as if a family wanted to utilize the effluent, which is the water that comes off alkaline hydrolysis, is that an option? And it's sorta. So it depends on your state and like the state regulation on where you're at. I will say most of them will say no. I know that in Washington State you can, but you only can have a certain percentage of it. So it's like a 5-gallon bucket, not the full amount. So with alkaline hydrolysis, the bone is very brittle. And so
Wet,
and
isn't it? Kind of,
it's a little bit wet.
No, it's dry, right?
It's really, really brittle, and it's very, very porous. And so because what happens is all of the actual cartilage and like the actual soft marrow that's in there gets completely pulled out. Unlike standard cremation where that stuff kind of gets cooked in there and kind of solidifies, so it makes a more stronger item. So when you're in that process, a lot of the time when you open up the container for alkaline hydrolysis, a lot of the bones are already broken up and kind of already falling apart to the point where you can touch them and so it's not the same level of pulverization that you see with standard cremation. Also, when you get those remains back, it looks like powdered sugar and it has the same consistency as powdered sugar. It is very different from cremated remains from fire cremation. Totally different experience.
Where is cremation, operation legal?
Colorado.
Where is aquamation
Oh,
legal?
goodness
I
gracious.
think Colorado is the closest to us.
Yeah, Colorado's probably your closest. But Nevada has
Yeah.
that. California does. Washington, Oregon. I'm trying to think. Most of the West Coast does now. But finding it is the other tricky part. So it's legal in California, but there's only 2 places in the whole state that are doing it. Because we're having problems with municipalities approving the permits because they see it as a unfriendly use of water, because we are very much a drought state. So they don't see it as being very eco-friendly when we are already a drought state. But like we said before, it's not really using that much water.
All right, time is up, but all right, one more.
The remains from aquamation cremating still?
Yeah.
And then can they be used like in your forest?
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
Exactly the same.
Exactly the same. The only difference is like the only big difference is with parting stone. So just parting, if you're I don't know, does everybody know what parting stone is? Okay, so parting stone is a company that takes cremated remains and turns them to solidified actual like worry stone rock that you can keep. You can put it in your yard, you can put it in your pocket, there's a lot of options with that. They do have different processes that they have to use for the aquamation remains because of its consistency is very different from what their original formula was built for. But otherwise it's very, very similar.
Can I ask about pet cremations? Is there just one company here, the Fairview Cemetery that does pet cremation?
French. Best,
Yeah, I think
best
there's
friend?
quite a few that
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think most funeral homes have an option so that they either know someone or can get best friends as French's.
Mm-hmm.
And most vets, they work with somebody.
Pets.
Pet cremation.
Can pets be at La Puerta?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so we have a pet cemetery at La Puerta, and we also have an area in the cemetery where you can be buried next to your pet. So, yeah. Yep.
Love that.
Yay. Wow, we've covered a lot of territory today. This was great. Hey, thank you guys. And we're going to take a 15-minute break. And when we come back, we have a shrouding demonstration to do.